Hi everyone, Professor Philip Travis here. It is week 8 here at EOU for Military History 360. This week we are going to take a look at the Vietnam War. We'll be examining the Vietnam War this week and next week. Of course, we looked at the Second World War our previous 2 weeks. We were reading the E.B. Sledge book the last 2 weeks. This week we're reading Ways of War Chapter 13, and everybody should now be really getting in this week to the Philip Caputo book, A Rumor of War, which of course is on Philip Caputo's combat experience. He also went back as a military journalist in the Vietnam War. Both, like the E.B. Sledge book, the Caputo book is a very powerful and award-winning first-hand account of the American military's experience in Vietnam, particularly in ground operations in Vietnam. So read Caputo this week and also next week. Our first paper, we have 2 papers in this class. One is a short paper. The second paper is a short paper. It's 2 pages on counter-jihad, and that'll be due at the very end of the term. The first paper is a 4-page paper, and it's on the readings of Philip Caputo and E.B. Sledge, so with the Old Breed and A Rumor of War. I have posted the prompt for the paper with a couple little revisions for you that I think are, in the interest of your writing this paper. The prompt is revised and it's in modules for this week. The paper is due at the end of next week, so it's due at the end of week 9. You can take a look at the prompt and it's all there, but just to give you a basic idea of what the revision is, remember what we're doing here is we're reading both of these books, and we're going to write a paper that sort of connects a central theme or makes a central point about what these 2 first-hand accounts sort of say to the historian about the American military experience in these 2 Asian wars, or wars in Asia. So the little change I made is, before I was saying that you had to create a specific theme, and that's fine. If you can find a specific theme that both of the books seem to clearly emphasize, excellent. Do that. But I figured to open up the opportunity, I'm opening this up so you can also write a sort of compare and contrast essay. So if you read both of these books and you're like, I think what really jumps out to me is the dissimilarity. If the difference is what jumps out to you, then I'm also giving the option to write a paper about how these 2 conflicts were different. Again, make a specific thesis statement. I want to see analysis. Remember, a specific thesis statement is something that is not overtly vague. It is focused and involves a level of analysis. But so you can either find and develop a thesis that sort of connects the books with a shared similarity, or you can compare and contrast them and discuss their dissimilarities and how they show some fundamental differences between the Vietnam War and the Pacific theater of war that E.B. Sledge was writing about. Either way, I want a focused, specific thesis statement that involves analysis. The paper should be 4 pages in length, no more than 5 pages. Again, the prompt and the checklist is up for you. If you have any questions about that, let me know. But again, you can either find that specific theme, or you can compare and contrast and find a specific dissimilarity that conveys an important message about the American military experience. So we're looking at the Vietnam War this week. The Vietnam War we'll also be looking at the Cold War, because the Vietnam War is a war of containment. The Cold War policy for the United States when it came to combating communism throughout the globe was known as the containment policy. And so the Vietnam War was a limited war of containment centered around the idea of preserving the independence of the Republic of South Vietnam. So this week we're going to look a little bit at the roots of the war. There's a documentary film that I've posted for you on the roots of the Vietnam War that everyone should watch. There's a quiz associated with this too. It's about an hour long. It's a PBS documentary. So watch that film. You can take the quiz while you watch the film. You can open the film up in another window and take the quiz. The questions will pop up in the quiz as you're watching. I mean, they're not going to be literally in the video, but they're in order. So take the quiz while you watch the documentary film. There's 5 questions on that quiz. I also have a weekly lecture this week on the Vietnam War. I have a lecture next week on the Vietnam War as well. So please take a look at this week's lecture on the Vietnam War. I think it will really help emphasize some of the key points in our readings for this week in both Caputo and also in Ways of War, Chapter 13. Discussion forum, as always, this week. The factoid for this week, I'll try, we've had some long factoids. Try to make this one a little bit shorter, but I thought I would share a little, personal family history with you. Last week we were actually talking about the Battle of Britain quite a lot in some of the discussion forum threads. And interestingly, my mom is English. She was born in London, and she was born in London during the Second World War. And in fact, her home was destroyed by the Luftwaffe during the Second World War. She later immigrated to the United States. The factoid is this, actually. I want to share with you my father. My father was from California, and my father served in the Vietnam War. He was part of the Coast Guard. He was in the Coast Guard for 28 years. He's now passed away. But during the Vietnam War, the Coast Guard was merged with the Navy, and my father served on a naval vessel outside of Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin. It was involved in targeting operations of enemy positions in Vietnam. And so the factor for this week is I just want to share with you some of the medals from Vietnam. And these are, kind of general awards, but I wanted to just share with you some of the medals from the Vietnam War that my father received. This medal here, if you can see that, this medal is a Vietnam Service Medal. And this medal was given by the government of South Vietnam to service members who served within South Vietnam for 6 months or for 6 months in combat operations that occurred outside of South Vietnam but were part of the alliance and support of the effort in Vietnam. And so this is one of my dad's medals, the Vietnam Service Medal. You also would receive that if you were wounded and had less than 6 months service. This is the Good Achievement Medal my father received. And over here, this is a kind of a standard, well, not a standard, but a Good Conduct Medal for my dad, not specifically related to Vietnam per se. Some of his ribbons here. Here, of course, you see the ribbon associated with the Vietnam service. Just below it, this ribbon here is the Combat Action Ribbon, which individuals received for their involvement in operations. And this one here is the Coast Guard Sea Service Ribbon for operations on the high seas in the Coast Guard. So these are some of my dad's awards. He was a 28-year veteran in the Coast Guard. And interestingly, during the Vietnam War, medals became kind of controversial. As we know, Vietnam became a significantly protested war, and actually a not insignificant number of people protesting the Vietnam War by the late 60s and the early 70s were in fact veterans themselves. The Vietnam Veterans Against the War, which of course was headed up by future Senator and Secretary of State and presidential candidate John Kerry. The VVAW, the Vietnam Veterans of the War, held some of the most significant protests against Vietnam in the latter stages of the war that occurred during the Vietnam War. And there was a sense on the part of some service members that medals were almost sort of that the soldiers' valor, so to speak, was being taken advantage of, and using medals for sort of like photo ops and these types of things. And in some cases, medals were even thrown back at the steps of the Capitol by veterans who were protesting America's involvement of the war. So in some cases, medals themselves became a controversy as part of the overall anti-war movement to Vietnam, in which some veterans even tossed their medals back in protest to the Vietnam War. But the factor for this week is my father's medals, particularly the service medal received for service in Vietnam. And on the back of this medal, it says Vietnam Bo Ten, which is where the medal was from. So the Vietnam Service Medal for my father, Charles Gary Atkins Travis, who served 28 years in the Coast Guard. Little personal family history. Post that factoid in the extra credit area, the extra credit discussion board for this week. Get your bonus point added to a test score at the end of the term. Let's have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you in the discussion forum.